Good evening. I'm Donna Turner, and I have the privilege of being the minister at Trinity United Church in New Glasgow. A few years ago, we at Trinity started a talking series we call TUC Talks. We aim to provide speakers in this series who will inspire transformative, upbeat conversations. Tonight's guest will not disappoint, and thank you for being a part of this audience. Danny Graham has held senior positions in business, law, government, and politics over the past 30 years. But I knew Danny from high school, where we shared several classes together at Sydney Academy. Even then, it was obvious to me that this smart, motivated, funny, and popular young man would be a leader open to see the world through a different lens. He fondly remembers a time in the early 80s when he lived in New Glasgow and worked with what we now know as Crombie REIT. For 10 years, Danny was the chief negotiator on Aboriginal rights for the province of Nova Scotia. He is credited with starting the Nova Scotia Restorative Justice Program and has worked to advance justice reforms within the United Nations and the various countries spanning 4 continents. He has been recognized by organizations throughout Atlantic Canada for his community and public leadership. He helped write We Choose Now, a playbook for Nova Scotia, a follow-up to the report from the Ivany Report. Currently, Danny is the Chief Engagement Officer for Engage Nova Scotia, an independent nonprofit that invites Nova Scotians to be more collaborative, inclusive, and adaptive to change. Engage Nova Scotia is leading the Nova Scotia Quality of Life Initiative in collaboration with leadership teams across the province, including local leadership teams in every region of the province. We look forward to this presentation and to the question and answer period which follows. And so will you join me in a virtual applause for Danny Graham?
Thank you, Donna, and thank you everyone for joining us for this conversation this evening. I'm quite excited about having the opportunity to see your faces. I'm not sure if that technology will be brought in until the very end when I get a gallery view of everyone, but I'm really mindful that I'm going to lead a discussion probably for about 30 minutes or so, and then invite everyone else to provide their perspectives about what they're hearing and what they're seeing related to the work that we're doing at Engage. I'm part of a large team, as undoubtedly many of you are, and the slides that I'm going to share with you here this evening I'm working the technology as we speak, and I'm hoping that it's going to work in a moment. If it doesn't, I've got some backup to make that work. You'll probably notice that the initial slide that was up on the screen with my face is not the one that I have right now, so I will take all the blame for being a baby boomer, as Donna pointed out, in trying to work the technology here this evening. So we're going to spend, as I said, 30, maybe a little bit more than 30 minutes talking about the Nova Scotia Quality of Life Initiative. But I'd invite you, as you do that, to think about it in your own context as somebody who lives in Pictou County or perhaps other parts of Nova Scotia, and also as a member of the congregation or as a global citizen. There are lots of ways to imagine yourself in the conversation that we're going to be talking about. I'm quite conscious as we do this that the United Church has such a deep history of creating connections between the community and social justice issues and the wider world that we live in, and doesn't sort of sit in isolation related to this. So it's a delight to be with you in a place that I called home. As Donna mentioned, when I lived in Glasgow, worked in Stellarton, played hockey for the Bombers Club back then, and very much appreciate being back with you, and looking forward to the conversation that we have today about Nova Scotia, Mi'kma'ki, the place we all call home. You probably are wondering a little bit about our little organization, Engage Nova Scotia. I'm going to share a few slides with you that give you a sense of what we're about. And it's going to begin with a small metaphor and a bit of a hearkening back to what we've been trying to do as we attempt to live up to our potential as Nova Scotians. For almost 100 years, we've been writing reports about our future, and earnest, smart people have been predominantly focused on the economic and population challenges, which continue to this day. We're going to talk a little bit about this. But one of the things that in the last 10 years or so seems to have surfaced more is a recognition that those economic and population challenges don't exist in isolation. And so the work that we do at Engage Nova Scotia, a not-for-profit organization that sits at the intersection of the public, the private, the academic, and the community sectors, is trying to do is really go to the more rooted, less visible issues about our social, cultural, environmental, and democratic issues, and to make sure that we're vibrant, inclusive, and resilient as a people. We need to sort of make sure that we're understanding those challenges more than we have perhaps in the past. And when we do that, I just want to acknowledge the many partners that we have in making this happen. So this logo soup was created a couple of years ago. It's a bit dated now, but it includes, of course, organizations and with whom we have been partnered in your region of the province. And from one end to the other, it feels that whether somebody's interest were academic or environmental or about industry, we've been fortunate in our efforts to make sure that many people see themselves in this initiative as a whole. So what's this all about? In the spring of 2019, we asked Nova Scotians to take a chance on us. And we sent 80,000 homes in Nova Scotia a 230-question survey and said, if you believe in the importance of quality of life, we'd love to hear from you. And now 230 questions is something that pollsters suggested would only get a 2% response rate to. But Nova Scotians responded to this call to consider our quality of life and our well-being, and responded at the highest rate as a percentage and the highest numbers of people that have ever answered this type of work. And it gives us a treasure trove as Nova Scotians, especially now that we're going through such significant times of transition, to consider, okay, what's the heartbeat of our province? And what do we think, not just across the province as a whole, but in each region of the province? When Stats Canada produced the map that's before you right now, and it showed that this is actually where people live, work, and play, it brought us a sigh of relief. And I expect that it would for Pictonians, as they see that the research that we have received gives us 756 responses to 230 questions from people in your region of the province. So this is where you live, work, and play. And as you can see in other parts of the province, there are similar groups. I'd just like to accentuate that there are leadership teams in every one of the regions of our province. So I'll say a little bit more about the local leadership team under the leadership of municipal leaders, and the community college and RENs and health workers have provided us with support in every one of those regions to sort of bring this, as we like to say, from being a measurement exercise to a change initiative. Now, that's an ambitious thing, because many of you would know so often we measure and create reports and we don't end up sort of bringing them into the hearts and minds of people that bring about change. And that, of course, is a significant question that we're holding as we look to reach Nova Scotians and reveal what's possible and make these results accessible. What I'm going to do for the next probably 15 minutes or so is take you into the belly, if you will, of this particular project, give you an understanding of what we've measured, what Nova Scotians have told us, and then take you out to a wider context that invites you back into the question of what can you do and how can you be involved, and how does this relate to the pandemic in some fashion. So we've been reaching out to dozens and dozens of organizations, and they've been reaching out to us. This is just a sampling of the sectors with whom we have been in conversation over the last several months. We're excited about the level of enthusiasm that's being shown by all of these groups when we do presentations that invariably results in us sharing this particular slide. So feel free with the organizers of this to get a copy of any of the slides or all of the slides that are contained here. I'll leave it up to Donna and others to make sure that that is something that's considered. But the most animating part of this particular slide will give you the following sense. Across the black bar, you can imagine, I want to know questions about Pictonians relative to their age and perhaps their income or their level of education or their disability. Or whether they rent or own their homes. And my questions are about whether they feel safe, whether they feel connected to others, whether they can meet their needs, whether they have access to their recreation facilities, whether they have a good experience in the natural world around them. With 230 questions and dozens of ways that we can imagine answers, it gives your community, your region, every region of the province, the opportunity to listen to Nova Scotians in a way that we haven't before. We're really at the beginning of this many years project, and already requests like this one from HRM just recently asking, okay, we're trying to recover from the pandemic. We want to know how women are doing with these kinds of answers. And we don't just want to know general answers related to women. We want to understand it across different income levels. So this is just one sampling of the kind of slide that could get created when you consider questions that are relevant to your region or the whole province or other regions of the province, because perhaps there are people who don't live in Pictou County who identify more with one of the other regions in that map that we showed a little bit earlier. So let's take a closer look at how you might be able to get your hands on some of these results. You'll see from this slide that we've produced a report that's available on our website, engagenovascotia.ca. It'll be referenced again a little bit later, but at engagenovascotia.ca, you'll see all 10 of those regions across every one of those 230 questions delineated for each question and how they're doing relative to the provincial average. That local leadership team that I spoke about earlier already has some analysis related to your region. I'm going to be touching in a little bit on some questions that I think are particularly important about trust and togetherness. Of the many things that we are able to consider, this we think is one of the most important. And tonight, I thought it was particularly important given the invitation that we've received to touch on this issue of trust and togetherness because of the importance of it for us as humans as we search for meaning and purpose and our own place with each other in Nova Scotia. So other ways that are coming, we can do research ourselves. Research papers are being produced, and we're actually creating an online tool that will allow individuals and small organizations from across the province to access these kinds of results. When you consider, I'm going to touch on now what some early findings are. This is, I like to say, the sprinklings on the frosting of the cake, not even the frosting. So you're just getting a small feel for the kinds of things that we can learn about Nova Scotians. And the question that I'm going to ask you to consider relates to those 8 domains of different topics that we have. And the questions that are listed on this page right here are going to succeed us in the next 5 slides, where we've asked Nova Scotians on a scale of 1 to 7, how satisfied are you with any one of these particular issues? And you'll see their responses broken down by different populations of people. First, we're going to take a quick look at older Nova Scotians, and I'll just give you a sense. I know it's a busy slide, so I apologize. Don't try to read the particular numbers on the right-hand side. That would strain anybody's eyes, I realize. But what I want you to notice is that, first of all, in general, people are more satisfied with the answers at the top of the page than they are at the bottom of the page. So generally speaking, Nova Scotians are more satisfied with their neighborhoods and their neighbors and their relationships, less satisfied with local government and democracy and their access to arts and culture opportunities in their communities. That's consistent across demographic and geographic spreads that we've put this through. For older Nova Scotians, which might come as a bit of a surprise for people, people 65 and older, they actually are more satisfied than the provincial average or the mean for our province in every one of those 16 questions. Now, again, this isn't a perfect snapshot of how somebody is experiencing things, but we know through the work that has been done internationally with the OECD in particular, these are really important questions amongst the 230. So what we're seeing is that before COVID, and I think it's important to highlight that, older Nova Scotians have been reporting that they're more satisfied in these areas than, for example, people who are new to Nova Scotia. So same questions, but we have disaggregated the population according to those people who have moved from other parts of Canada or from another country to Nova Scotia, and they've only been living here for 5 years or less. You'll see that their level of satisfaction in each of those 16 questions, depicted by the light blue bar, is lower than the dark blue bar, which is the provincial average. When you look at people with disabilities and chronic illnesses, and I think it's important to highlight, and just with a pause and a note, because of my connection to personally to communities of people with disabilities, Pictou County does as good a job as any place I know of in Nova Scotia in terms of including people. Summer Street Industries, for example, is known across the province as one of the leaders in as an organization that sets a pioneering brand for people who are too often, left behind. So 30% of Nova Scotians identify as having a disability or a chronic illness. Traditionally, Nova Scotia rates as the highest province with people, with that percentage of people in that category. So clearly something that we as a province need to continue to pay attention to. I'm going to circle back to issues related to people with low incomes, but just point out that same trends that we saw with respect to people with disabilities show up for people who have lower incomes. This probably doesn't come as a surprise to you, given the attention that poverty receives, at least in conversation, perhaps not as much in action. And you'll see that in terms of people's financial circumstances and work situations, two of the questions in there, particular huge gaps for people. And then there was a group that showed up in our slides that, again, I will touch on a little bit more in some succeeding slides about single parents. So this is about adults living alone, but with children in their homes. And more than any of the demographic groups that we saw, this sort of popped our eyes, and we said, oh, these are the people who are experiencing significant challenges in meeting their needs, in having good relationships, in finding ways for them to feel physically and mentally well. Time stresses are huge. So as we come through the pandemic and we start to think practically, what can we do and who should we be paying attention to, whether it's childcare or work flexibility or work hours, generally it is single parents really stand out for us as a population group that warrants greater attention in Nova Scotia. So this is just one way to do the analysis for us. I won't get preoccupied with this particular slide because it's very busy, and it asks the same 16 questions. Again, they're in the same order that they were in earlier, but you'll see in the first column where it says rank in Nova Scotia, it ranks the aggregate of Nova Scotia rates happiness with neighborhoods at the highest level. They're least happy with their local governments. But across each region of the province, and you'll see that in the third last column, Pictou County is included. You'll see where your ranking of what you're satisfied with is different than it would be with respect to the provincial average. So it would take us a lot of time to go through the explanations of every particular row in there. I'm really sharing it with you to give you a sense that there are so many different ways to slice and dice this so that you understand your region, you understand the people within your region, and you understand possibly the things that will begin to sort of move their lives from one where they struggle to ones where they're more included in our society. So speaking of struggling, and especially at this time, I want to pay special attention to some of the slides that are contained in our survey results, again, from Nova Scotians, almost 13,000 people, largest data set of its kind in North America, but with particular attention around trust and togetherness. These are lessons, we think, from the pandemic. And I like to sometimes say that trust is the oxygen that drives our personal relationships, our communities, and wider society. And what we've learned here in Nova Scotia is that trust in institutions has kept us informed, and the togetherness that we have as Nova Scotians has kept us safe. It's so alive that we as a province that for so often didn't really know its own story is now in this ironic time when we're all experiencing difficulties. There is a place, a region, the Atlantic region, where this notion of togetherness, I think, is really something that stands out for all of us, and we need to pay attention to, because this notion of social cohesion and trust and togetherness are actually as big drivers as many of the things we often talk about health and education in terms of improving people's life satisfaction more generally. So what does it tell us? First of all, I think it's important to note some concerning trends. For a long time, trust in institutions, and this is a global phenomenon, has been dropping all around the world. If you're interested, there's an organization called Edelman Trust Barometer, that has been tracking for the last 2 generations the decline in people's trust in every country in government, media, business, and NGOs. So these numbers that you'll see on the screen right here, for example, low trust in provincial and federal governments, used to be in the 70s and 80s, 50 or 60 years ago, but they've been dropping precipitously for a long period of time. And that has significant implications about whether or not we're going to be able to tackle our challenges. So what within that stands out for us? Well, this one is a real concern. People with lower incomes in Nova Scotia clearly have lower trust in institutions more generally than people in higher incomes. So you might wonder to yourselves, why don't they get it? And how come they can't become more involved? Well, this is a consistent pattern when the Canadian Index of Wellbeing, which is our partner in administering the sort of intellectual part of this, has done this in the region of Waterloo or Kingston or Guelph or Victoria. They consistently see the same results as some of the ones that we're pointing to here. And I mentioned before the concerns that we have about single parents. So these are different living arrangements that speak about couples with children at home or adults sharing accommodations, for example. The 4th bar down, again, touches on adults living with children at home, single parents, if you will. And again, you see this concerning sign about whether or not this is a group that we are going to be able to sort of reach and say, okay, let's come along with ideas that will improve all of our lives together. So again, trust and togetherness. What does the togetherness part of the research that we've done begin to tell us? First thing that it tells us is that, and this slide is a busier one, it gradates according to people's income. And it looks at 3 separate notions of togetherness. The number of the close friends they have, the number of close relatives, and the number of friends they can ask a favor from. And without getting into, again, the fine details of this, you'll see that as income goes up, people have more social connections. And again, I'll point to same set of questions, breaking things down according to couples with children, single couples without children, et cetera, single parents show up again as an area where there are some worries. Let me just, I know this is a lot of information. It's just intended to sort of give you a sprinkling of the trends that we're inviting you to pay attention to. And the last two slides sort of invite you into the really important questions related to social isolation. Again, we see the same pattern that we saw before, where people who feel more isolated are the ones with lower incomes. And again, we see this pattern not just with single parents, but with adults who are sharing accommodations with other adults. So we at Engage aren't just about the ideas and the research and the data associated with this. We try ourselves. We're just a small NGO, as I mentioned before, to create pathways for people to address some of the most pressing challenges. So in this time of the pandemic, we've coordinated a pan-provincial initiative called From Me to You. Some of you might have heard about it because it's gotten some media attention over the last little while. And if you're interested in participating in it, please go to our website at engagenovascotia.ca and go to the From Me to You section of it. What we're inviting people to do is really a simple exercise that involves reaching out and saying to somebody who could be the clerk at the Tim Hortons, or it could be someone who you see every day, but and maybe a neighbor, and you've always wanted to say hello to, and you just want to be able to say, I see you. You're not isolated. You're part of this larger community. In the dog days of winter, in the most challenging winter we've ever had from a social connections point of view, this is just a small effort that we're inviting you to consider becoming part of in some fashion. If you want, we can, Donna, share some of the cards we have to you for the congregation to spread out to other people as well. So a practical pathway to increase connections, to actually reach out and reflect that you're your brother and sister's keeper. At this time, you matter. That's the heartbeat of what we want to be able to do. And there's a wider context to this. So back to the United Church, as I said at the outset, has a tradition of advocacy for leveling the playing field and ensuring that those who are so often not included in our society do actually have an opportunity to be so. So we actually think that even through this difficulty, we're incubating questions that could lead to better social, economic, and personal change for people. The things that we see now about the inequities in society, we can't really unsee anymore, about institutional, racial, and social injustices that exist. And as individuals, I'm sure that many of you are slowing down to say, oh, I never did this before, but I'd like to continue to do it after we're on the other side of this particular time. And I'll bet you a lot of it has to do with nature and relationships, because we know that improving quality of life is something that's integrally important to Nova Scotians. So after the pandemic, in August of this past year, we asked Nova Scotians two questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, we should measure our success by, answer 1, growing the economy. And the people who answered 7 to 10 in that scale rated 58% of the respondents. We repeated the question and we replaced growing the economy with improving people's quality of life. And you'll see that those who answered 7 to 10 rated 82% on that slide. And so I want to just pause and say that these two questions are not in competition with each other. The balance, however, about what we do in public policy and choices in our society needs to be figured out so that we understand better. We're improving we're growing the economy in service of what? And in service of whom? And especially in service of those people who, if they had a better income, as we pointed out earlier, if we leveled the playing field for people at the low end of economic conditions, we would substantially improve their quality of life. So not in competition with each other, but really an opportunity for us to shine a light on the balance that we need to get in sort of not seeing growing the economy as a proxy for everything successful, and recognizing that improving our quality of life just depends on a healthy economy. And on that note, I won't go through each of the bullets related to this. I actually think for people who are economically interested that There is a window through which the ship, if you will, has the potential to come back in for us as Nova Scotians at this particular time. So I grew up, as Donna said, in Cape Breton, and everyone we went to high school with planned before they graduated to go down the road to live, work, and play in other provinces, typically. That was the story for us as Cape Bretoners and as Nova Scotians, for that matter. Things have changed, and people less and less are chasing jobs, and jobs are chasing people, and people are chasing places. And I happen to believe that there is no better place to live than in Nova Scotia. I believe that firmly, and some of our research supports that. And in fact, the research supports the notion that, generally speaking, and this is an international trend, it comes out in our research as well, there is higher life satisfaction in non-urban parts of our province and across the country. So as we now move online, and people can, with good internet, that's another story, we've measured that as well, work from anywhere, this creates opportunities that Nova Scotia hasn't had before. So I think there's a new advantage for us as Nova Scotians that create economic opportunity in ways that we haven't before. So just back to, what are the trends and what do we see more generally? Are we alone in thinking this all through? We're not the only country that's paying attention to this by any means. And your intuition about, well, the relationship between the economy and quality of life is a sound one at one level. And I'm sharing this slide just to give you an illustration of that. You will see that when the UN does its global happiness report, the 10 happiest countries, the life satisfaction is not happy like glee, it's just a different concept for it, relative to the ones where people are least satisfied, clearly show a correlation with the economies. But something, I'm just going to repeat that, the column on the left-hand side, you'll see that Canada rates 9th out of 10 happiest countries. I'm repeating the same set of slides from the previous one, highlighting the correlation between it and, on the right-hand side, amongst advanced economies. So this is created by the World Economic Forum, Davos, where they say, okay, we're going to do a correlation between what countries are the most satisfied and which of them leave fewer people behind. So what they do is create an inclusive development index. And you'll see that amongst countries like ours, where there is enough money to go through the system, it's those that actually ensure that people get a leg up, they get a good education, they get supported in their skills development, et cetera, are the ones that actually are highly correlative with general aggregate life satisfaction. So just an interesting thought. Let's bring it back to Nova Scotia. I mentioned that we have 10 regions where all of this is happening, and that there's a local leadership team in your region of the province amongst those. We're hoping, as we move out through the spring of this year, actually to engage stakeholders. And you'll see in the light blue circle of the slide that you have in front of you that there is a local leadership team that has been working to sort of understand the Pictou situation, and they will soon be exploring which municipalities or public officials, along with the public and private sector, and sometimes unaffiliated people who less often are part of the conversation and feel out, get included in the conversation about, this is what we know now about our region, the province. What can we begin to do about it? And how can we bring that last circle, the general public, into a conversation that is particularly relevant to them? So I've shared a lot. I'm going to leave you with some contacts. If you want to know more about what's happening in your region, with the permission of one of the local leadership team members, Ray Gunn, I'm just sharing her email address. But there are other people who are part of the Pictou local leadership team, and at our team, Haley Vidler is able to provide you with some insights if you want to know more information about the program more generally. Again, Donna, feel free to share these slides. And finally, just the questions that this might spark for you as something that I would, I want to leave you with. As members of a congregation, or as Pictonians, or as Nova Scotians, or as global citizens, what are the things that really get sparked for you when you see this and you imagine, okay, we can do something that's meaningful? How can we be in better conversations with each other and take from what we've learned over this difficult year to be more trusting and together and build on the richness that we have to an even better Nova Scotia? That's my presentation. I'm gonna, because I'm a Maritimer, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen so I can see your faces, hopefully. If the technology works, I'm gonna go to gallery view so I see everyone, and I'm gonna put the headphones on so that I can hear the questions that'll be coming in as we go along. Great.
All right. Danny, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Right on. Thank you very much for that. That was fantastic. My name is Neil. If you were paying attention to the last TUC talk, you might remember me. I'm a member of Trinity United, and I'm here in Dartmouth with Danny. Going to help facilitate the Q&A here. If you're watching on Facebook, I encourage you to take a moment and type a question into the comment section. We are monitoring that. You can also type a question into the chat if you're joining us on Zoom, or if you have a question and you're on Zoom, you'd like to ask the question. If you could be quiet but unmute your mic, that will give me an indication that you do have a question, and then because I can tell that you've unmuted, and I'll go over to you. Okay, so that's kind of how it's going to work. I'm just looking at the list now here, and I'm seeing some folks do have questions. I think Lynn Sheridan, you've unmuted yourself. Do you have a question, Lynn?
I do. I'm shocked and dismayed by the lack of trust in all of our government institutions, and the fact that it's an international phenomenon. We smug Canadians like to think it's more of an American problem than it is a Canadian problem. How's that explained, Danny? Do we know?
How much time do we have, Lynn?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I'm the person who'd be able to explain all of it, but I can talk to you about a little bit about the trends. So you'll get a better, more fulsome explanation from the Edelman Trust Barometer that tracks this. Here are the implications of it, and I'll say a little bit about what's happening in Canada regarding this. So you'll recall that arguably the most important pieces of legislation that we live under, like the Canada Health Act, 1960s, the Charter of Rights, early 80s, came about at a time when it was kind of centrally driven. We fundamentally transformed the healthcare system to together kind of model, all for one, one for all. That happened at a time when we had about 75 or 80% trust in the institution of the federal government to do things. And it was still relatively high in the early 80s when we brought in the charter, another example of something that we sit on as a foundation. Now, as we're facing significant challenges, trust is bottoming out everywhere. And in terms of advanced Western economies, Canada consistently comes out kind of in the middle of where trust exists. Interestingly, some places, arguably not as much an advanced economy like Russia, there's particularly low trust amongst citizens, but the trend is all going in the wrong direction. And Edelman points out that just in the last couple of years, while the US is about a few years ahead of us in terms of aggregate declining trust, there is in Nova Scotia or in Canada, we've just tipped over into the less trusting sort of categories in the way that they do it. So if I were to point you to things that might be of interest in this area, some of you might be familiar with the work that Robert Putnam pioneered called Bowling Alone around social cohesion. And he used to talk about, when I grew up, people would join bowling leagues and go on them on Saturday mornings, and they'd go to churches and they'd meet people across demographic profiles and get to know each other and knit the stories together into a sense of oneness. With the decline of some of the institutions, church included, in terms of their influence, what appears to be happening is that we're less committed to each other in some of those fashions. So social cohesion, trust and togetherness are critically important if it's the oxygen, and we need to find ways to get it back into the room.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent question. Thank you, Lynn. If I do see your microphone unmuted, I'm going to come to you. I see Margaret Ellen Disney, your microphone is unmuted. Did you have a question?
It's Tom.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
Tom, right on.
Danny, thank you very much. That's a wonderful presentation. Lots of questions from it. But one question, in the 1960s, Robert Stanfield was thinking about a guaranteed annual wage for everyone. What do you think of that? It might help our problems. A lot of them are due to income.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tom. I'm just getting a little bit of feedback on this, Neil. I'm not sure if you can still hear me. I'm assuming you can. So I think it will come eventually. There's a lot to be said, and actually, I'm just in the process of writing a piece for the Royal Society of Canada at their request about this question about whether we should be paying closer attention to universal basic income or some such thing as that. Mr. Stanfield was ahead of his time on many things, and I think in general, he probably was in this, but this question is actually connected to the earlier questions that Lynn was asking about trust and togetherness. It's harder in a time when we are focused on our individual interest increasingly and less on the collective to go for big ideas like universal basic income. So it becomes a greater challenge that could create a schism for us. But I'm hearing across the political spectrum, especially under the pandemic, that people are saying, yeah, actually, that held us together. So how then do we put that into a fiscal model that supports us over time? It's not the only universal public policy question that I think needs to come to the surface for a deliberation. Which one comes first, I think, will be something for us to consider if we are, in fact, going to be a more inclusive society. And I would put beside it the notion of supporting our young people before they arrive in school, which was promised a number of times through successive governments, that hasn't become a universal Canadian something that is an investment in the future that would return, most of the calculations suggest, if you're patient about the time, economically, fiscally, and otherwise, but it just requires some front-end investment. And then there's also the issues related to education and training at the post-secondary level that also warrant some attention. So you're pointing to the kinds of policy questions that we need to think through again and think of them as investments, because those countries that I put up on the slides earlier that you'll notice, Scandinavian countries and others, people thought they were basket cases 20 years ago when they invested heavily in education and childcare and related issues. Turns out that they're knocking the lights out on economic questions because they made the investment at that front end.
Thank you, Don. Danny.
Okay, we keep going here. I see some other folks with their things unmuted here. Graham McNeil, you have a question.
Hi, Danny. It's Graham and Carolyn here.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Happy to say that I played against him about that many years ago in that. But, we'll forget all that for now.
I recall it.
Enjoyed your comments. I'm intrigued, or we're intrigued about the ability of a community to enhance trust and engagement. And I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do, no doubt. Can you think of an example other than the ones that you've raised of a community that has made some progress in those areas and have exhibited some best practices, for instance, that we all could learn from?
I don't think there's just a list, but I was in conversations earlier today about folks who are provincial government officials, in fact, who are building sort of a healthcare facility in New Waterford. And they've recognized that what would it be like if a seniors home and the hospital and recreation facilities are somehow connected in a way that don't silo people by their ages and sort of have young people playing alone, and then you reach a certain age of your life where you're going through the workforce, and then another age of your life where you're separated from everyone else. And so what I found to be interesting was that at least at a government level, they're starting to imagine how they can build institutions through a lens where people are intersecting on a regular basis. But I think that, ultimately the complexity associated with building trust needs to identify the challenges that technology brings, where we're increasingly siloed into our, favorite channels of social media or something like that, that take us away from the mixing pot that exists in this conversation, obviously, for better and richer things to happen. So it's sometimes actually pretty simple. And when you think back to the way in your region, your community comes together, and I know how much it comes together in the summer times, for example, are there ways for you to think through, okay, it's not just a summertime activity where we have festivals of some sort to do things, but that we can invite people and make sure that some of the some of the suspects who don't normally sort of show up to things really feel quite welcomed. And it's not just sort of the people who have, who have always been showing up to events. And that just requires a little, sometimes difficult conversations and hand-to-hand combat with people who you don't know, or you may even disagree with on some public policy issues. And, Pictou County has gone through, frankly, and we all know this, a rather challenging 7 years or so. And so this is a great way. I like to think that every challenge is an opportunity in disguise. So using that as the opportunity to really build a mixing pot where people can have those conversations, difficult or otherwise, that are rich and new. So thanks for that, Graham. Nice to see you, Carolyn.
Thanks.
Okay, keep going. Just a nice comment in the chat here. So all of you question askers, Michelle Ferris, indicated that these are wonderful questions, and I have to agree. I think she's right. These are great questions. I know Donna had a question. We're going to go over to Donna. Wonderful.
I wonder if Hal and Karen have.
Oh, we can go to Hal and Karen first?
Yeah, go to Hal and Karen and then come to me.
Gotta find Hal and Karen.
There.
Yeah, Danny, thank you very much for that presentation. It's fascinating to get that overview of life in Nova Scotia. Karen and I have just recently been asked to be point people for the United Church of Canada related to the basic income, livable income, and anticipating the election coming up federally, that there may be need to do a full press on politicians around this. I do know that in the research, low income is very, very much related to low satisfaction and lack of trust in institutions. So just wanted to come back to that fact, but to also ask Danny, is there an intention to have some kind of recommendations leading out of this Engage Nova Scotia project? Ultimately, are there recommendations, and to whom would they be directed?
Thanks, Hal. So I'll just start with that last question. Obviously, your member of parliament would be paying attention to these issues, as all members of parliament are. And I think all parties of all stripes, I think, are increasingly, some of you might be familiar with Hugh Segal, who is a PC strategist of strong reputation. He recently wrote a paper on universal basic income and the potential for it to become something that the PC party embraces. So I think it's something that will have a greater reception than it did before. In terms of Engage's work, here's what I would say. We are Switzerland. We have enough as a small organization to do in creating conditions for people to see all of this, and we operate in an apolitical kind of way. So all of this information is available to political parties to potentially advance federally, provincially, and municipally, for that matter, when you think about many of the issues relate to municipal kinds of issues. And so it's enough for us to sort of take that on. Our colleagues at the Canadian Index of Wellbeing, having done this for many years, actually take a further step than us, and they do advocate for universal basic income. So I think if you go to their website, they're in the well-being world. Obviously, they're actually one of the international leaders in it. They're Canadian, and it's probably the things they've been pressing the button on that turns up in their information the most. And just to sort of underline what you were saying earlier, Hal, it is that it's particularly people who are living in abject poverty. Like, we're talking about people who have experiences of earning less than $20,000 a year. When you look at their satisfaction rates relative to everyone else, it's kind of breathtaking. And then to put a face on it, these are people who some of us simply don't know because they're stuck in their homes and just surviving in our communities from one end of the province to the other. So good luck as you advance this as a priority.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, now let's go to Donna. Over to you.
Okay. I have about 15 questions, but I'm going to ask one. So institutionally, the demographic that we're trying to reach and reconnect with is also the demographic that you say shows the smallest, the lowest trust, or that the surveys say that they're the least trusting, which poses quite a big problem for churches. And we're a congregation who is always trying to connect with the community and find out where we can do things that are meaningful. TUC Talks is one example of that. But I'm looking at all the people on TUC Talks that are here tonight. I know most of them. That it's not necessarily the demographic we're trying to reach, though they're fantastic people who are thinkers and doers, and it's wonderful. But I'm also noticing that we might have something to say. I would like to think that churches could be among the voices that could be heard in your research and be brought to the table to do some troubleshooting and problem imagining what could be different together. And I was just writing, especially when you came to the end of your talk, I was writing, okay, so how can we be included in those conversations and those discussions? It's not just Chamber of Commerce or the Pictou County Ren or successful businesses, but also ordinary people like those of us who are on this talk who are clearly interested in building a better community. How can we connect with this project?
So we don't, first of all, the metaphor that we use about how this gets organized is not so much hub and spoke as it is an ecosystem of all the great work that you are doing in this kind of an effort, TUC Talk +++, and the work that you're all doing in other avenues where you're doing it. So in that respect, it's more of a matrix. There is nonetheless a local leadership team that I'm sure, I mentioned Ray Gunn's slide earlier, ray.gunn, R-A-E, Ray may be on the line and she may be ready to take your calls or messages. Other people have been part of this. You would recognize their names. I'm just using Ray's to make it easier. ray.gunn@novascotia.ca. And you'll find other people from your region who are looking to both understand it in a Pictou context and advance it. We think that the work that we're doing, not to sort of feel like we're putting a cape on, but we're getting attention from large the OECD, the Carnegie Foundation, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, all from outside of Canada, who are pointing to the Nova Scotia initiative, saying there's something that is promising about this particular type of work that has global implications, and that's why they're putting their eyes on this particular project. So by connecting to your local team and trying to imagine, is it possible for us to put some energy underneath this? And it's ambiguous, difficult work, as you pointed out, just to get to include more people, then it's a start. And what you might be able to do is connect different organizations. We're going to be speaking to the not-for-profit sector in Pictou County, actually, in sometime in the next month or so, which is another opportunity for us to connect in and provide, hopefully, some awareness about what could potentially happen. But many years, many people, and hopefully many of you will become connected in some fashion or other.
Okay, great question, Donna. Violet Cameron on Facebook just wanted to say, Danny, fantastic job. She said, very important issues and a lot to think about. And thank you for coming and speaking this evening. There's a few different folks saying thanks and also commenting on the good questions. It's a smart group of folks and they ask good questions. Eh, Danny?
Yes.
Okay, so that takes us to 7:57. We try to keep this to an hour, talks to an hour. I say this like I've been doing these for a while, but it's supposed to be an hour. So we're going to go down to Debbie Van Volpen. Debbie's going to take the mic and take it from there.
Can you hear me, Neil?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. As Neil said, my name is Debbie Van Volpen, and I am honored to be one of the members representing Trinity United Church's TUC Talks team. We would like to thank you, Danny, for your inspiring conversation this evening. And wow, what an immense amount of information to absorb. It is amazing the work that you and your team has captured of what Nova Scotians are feeling. So we can't wait to see the whole cake being frosted in the future, especially the online tool that we will be able to access for more information. And yes, our pandemic has certainly shown us all how Nova Scotians do come together to be safe and healthy, but that we all have to think more about and reach out to others. And from your chart, especially the singles who live alone and with children. And yes, our pandemic has certainly shown us all how Nova Scotians do come together to be safe and healthy, but that we all have to think more about and reach it. The information that you shared with us, Danny, certainly has shown us that we can and should do more. And yes, maybe we have to think outside the box in how a community can come together and even live together to help each other. Hopefully, we will all assist with the social, the economic, and personal change in our communities, but it does have to start with us as individuals. Thank you, Danny. And I do want to also thank Neil. We had a bit of technical glitches the last time, and we want to thank Neil, the CEO of the This Is Marketing Company in Dartmouth. He gave a great talk on divisiveness in politics last November, but like I said, with the technical issues, we wanted to do a little bit better thank you tonight. He called his talk Fear Plus Hope, the 4-letter words of politics. And it certainly was timely, as I'm sure many of you were glued to your TVs, as I was due to the election in the United States. So while both of you are together, we had hoped we were going to have an in-person token of our appreciation, but it's going to have to be virtually. We would like to give you, I'll show it to you here. We have had made up aprons. Can you see this? Well, I don't know if you can or not. There we go. It says TUC Talks, Food for Thought. And it's stitched in Trinity's new branding colors that Neil's company developed for us. And we hope that you gentlemen will be able to wear them. I hope you guys do a little cooking, so you'll have to have that on when you're doing some cooking. Yeah. Good, I'm glad to hear. We also want to thank Wearwool Garments for doing a fantastic job of being able to stitch these in a timely fashion for us. And so, again, thank you, Danny and Neil, for offering your words of wisdoms on such thought-provoking and hopeful topics. Thank you so, so much.
Well, thank you, Debbie.
Before we do go, folks, for those people who are out there on Zoom or Facebook, we would like to take just a moment to mention the next 3 speakers in our TUC Talk series. So later this month, Thursday, February 25th, we're having Dr. Aaron Smith and Nicole LeBlanc. They will chat with us about recruiting and retaining medical professionals in Northern Nova Scotia. Again, another timely topic that I am sure has impacted each and every one of you in some way. In March, on the 25th, we will have Allegra Swanson, who is the new Executive Director of Music Nova Scotia, and she will talk about the importance of music in our lives, especially during these crazy pandemic times. So as you can see, we are already and have had already transformative and uplifting conversations, and we have a few more coming in the future. So please check in with us wherever you found out about our online TUC Talks tonight, or www.havealittlefaith.ca, or pop in on the TUC Talk Facebook site for future dates and links to attend our next sessions, or even to catch up on ones that you might have missed. They're on Facebook as well. Thank you for spending your Thursday evenings with us, and we hope we have engaged you in such a way that you just want to get up out of that chair and help move Nova Scotia forward in a positive and progressive way. Thanks again, everyone.